animals of all kinds. I'm not quite sure I had ever had a live spider collection, but certainly dogs and cats have played a very important part of my life always. And it would seem like a house without an animal is actually maybe a house, but it's certainly not a home. And I think everybody kind of goes in and out with that. But for me, having animals and my long, long dream of having a horse at home, and you probably hear on the microphone, he's just a couple of doors down since we're sitting in the barn. It just tickles me to death that I've had him now for 23 years. And it's just a novelty every time I open the barn door to see him, that I know he doesn't belong to me, he belongs to part of the universe, and I'm just sort of borrowing him for a while. So I think that's probably my ruling passion, is my involvement with animals. I forgot who quoted that. It could have been W.C. Fields saying something like, the more I know about people, the more I love animals. But I'm not quite sure that's true. But maybe we're moving in the right direction. The second passion I've had, for almost 40 years right now, is teaching. And for many, many years, I was doing conventional teaching in a classroom. And classroom teaching is difficult. It is a little still environment. You can have exploding rockets going through and maybe a lot of video type of things going on. But about 15 years ago, I started doing international teaching, taking groups of students around the world, in which you spend not 15 minutes a time, 3 times a week in the classroom when the students are worried about what's going to happen, the homework for the next class, the date they may have, what movies are playing. But you have a kind of a captured audience when you're traveling through the outback of Australia or Mount Everest Base Camp. And so my lecturers always were on the trail, at the campfires, in buses, in planes. And so you have a captured audience for anywhere. My international teaching was anywhere from 3 weeks to 5 weeks with a group of students. And that is just wonderful. That is just absolutely wonderful. And I had wonderful experiences in Nepal. Took over 200 students there in all different regions. And on my grave, I could say that was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. After teaching, I would put love of life, and in one sense, in one very real sense, life can come in kind of 2 forms. One form is that one's life is goal-oriented. You're always looking for the end. You're looking at the end. You're looking at the light at the end of a tunnel. You're not looking at the process of getting to the end of a tunnel. And the other, of course, is the process. And when you get to your goal, it was the trip. And this is very an Eastern worldview. It was the trip what was so important and not the goal. And if doing those trips, and this is sort of Winnie the Pooh, the Tao of Pooh as well as the classic Winnie the Pooh, that every morning you could wake up and think, what kind of adventure will I have today? And I think if you do that, and sometimes you wake up gloomy, and sometimes you have a cold, and sometimes it's just not your day. But if 9 times out of 10, what's going to happen exciting today? That's the kind of passion I think will bring you long-term happiness. Is there a strategy for life? And could you put it into words, or do you just change your strategy every time the situation changes? But I think it comes down to the question whether do you follow your heart or do you follow your brain? And young people usually always follow their hearts, and the older people say you're not using your brain or you wouldn't get into these difficulties. But I think a good strategy is it's probably best to follow your heart. Even though your brain is telling you something otherwise, go with it. But do have the hope and perhaps skill that when your heart gets you really in bad trouble, that your brain, you can rely on your brain to get you out of that trouble. I think that's a fairly good strategy. And maybe the brain sometimes is not all up to it, but the brain is working pretty well when you're in deep trouble. Forced out, well, I think a better word would be fired. Now, fired is sort of a painful word, but recently there's been this wonderful program called The Apprentice, which has captured all of America apparently, and the Donald would say, you know, every day, every week he'd say, "You're fired." And I think that program may be influenced, and so I guess I'd rather have saying, instead of being forced out, you know, how do I feel about being fired? Well, I will say that it's awful. It's awful. And but I will also say it's probably not the worst thing in my life. And I want to relate to a story that happened to me years and years ago. In 1956, I believe, I worked for the White House. I was a CBS News motorcycle courier for the White House. And at the Shoreham Hotel, which is so famous right now because of the Watergate scandal, Adlai Stevenson, who had been running for the the presidential candidate, was beaten by Dwight Eisenhower. And Eisenhower, and the night I was there with the press corps, I was sitting right there a few feet away from Adlai Stevenson, and he was very emotional and taking questions from reporters, and one reporter said how he felt. And again, here's my favorite quotes of Abraham Lincoln. He quoted Lincoln. He said, as a boy going up the steps, he stubbed his toe, and he was too old to cry, but yet it hurt too much to laugh. And I just remember that. I just thought that was wonderful. And so I would say the feelings I have right now about the firing are not that strong. The other quote, I believe he said that night, when another person asked in a contest, and he said, "Oh, I went home and slept like a baby." And then he looked out at the audience and said, "I woke up every 2 hours and cried." And again, that kind of sadness I don't think I have. There are pretty awful experiences I wouldn't like to redo again, but being fired is really not one of them. But seriously, the one reason that it maybe is not so painful is because I seriously believe that it was just a plain miscarriage of justice. Almost 4 years had passed from the time that the original charges were made, and I really believe that the university at that point thought that they were valid, partly because of my own personal demeanor of riding a motorcycle and having long hair made me a little suspect. But it's also my belief, in my opinion, that very quickly after they started to investigate the charges, they realized that the charges were completely fabricated. And again, when you have a large machine, like a university would have many, many attorneys and deep pockets, once the machine begins running, it's very difficult to turn this machine off. You can't really come up and say, "Oh, sorry, Mr. Professor, we were in error," and just go ahead and do your own. So after 3 years, it was clear to everybody, and finally, to all the attorneys, that the charges leveled against me were false and were fabricated. But instead of apologizing to me, if you wish, they went off and found another witness, a young lady who had known 22, 23 years ago, who had made a charge that we had a improper relationship, which she had not talked about, did not mention to anybody for something like 12 years. And then all at once came and said that our actions together had really had a very bad effect on her life. And the university now grabbed her as not being able to pin anything on me from the previous professional, my postdoc, used this woman. But this woman has just a tremendously odd history, because 12 years after the alleged sexual relationship occurred, she came to the university and she just talked to everybody. She filed a complaint with the chancellor of the university. She filed a complaint verbally in a meeting with the president of the university. She wrote to the regents of the university. She made an appointment and talked to the dean of my college at the university. She went to the police station and filed a complaint. And all of this, nobody believed. I had never even known about that. It was sort of all hidden from me because it just led to nowhere. But after the postdoc charges, fell through, they collected this woman, and as far as I could tell, the regents, the University of Colorado, after some 22 years, and we're talking about due process and statute of limitation, did believe this woman. And it was the basis of this woman's testimony that some event that we had a relationship, an improper relationship 22 years ago, is according to the attorney, the sole reason that the dismissal process had occurred. And is that bad luck? Well, maybe it's a little bit bad luck. The football scandal right now is making everybody incredibly sensitive, and I think probably a lot of heads will roll, and maybe it's good to clean out houses, to clean house, and I might be swept up in the way. But after being on the faculty for 37 years, I have a deep love for the university, don't intend to change that, and I hope the young people coming after me can do a better job than we oldsters had done in the past.